All right, let's take our Bibles this morning and turn to Ephesians chapter 6. As we look at our headlines, I'm convinced more and more that Jesus' return is soon. As Carlene was saying, I really feel that. For thousands of years, Jesus has promised to come, and up until this morning, he's not done that. Why has he waited so long? The familiar verse in 2 Peter 3:9 tells us very clearly why. The Lord is not being slow about his promise to return, as some people think slow. No, he is being patient for your sake. He does not want anyone to perish, so he is giving more time for everyone to repent. Think of someone that you know who is not ready for Jesus' return. They are one of the reasons why Jesus has not come back yet. He desires them to be in his kingdom, and he's pulling them toward his kingdom all the time. And he doesn't want to return and have them have not come to be one of his people. Just how does God pull someone into his kingdom? How does that work? There are several methods that God uses to pull. If you're a Christian today, God pulled you through these methods. Number one is his creation. The creation shows us his power and his nature. What is God's nature like? Look at creation. God says, I display what I am like through my creation. My creativity, my power, my intelligence, my just awe-inspiring nature is found in nature. One of the ways God pulls us to himself is through nature. Another way is through his law written on our hearts. Everybody has his laws of right and wrong written on our hearts, touching our conscience, letting us know when we've done the wrong thing, letting us know when we've done the right thing. Another thing is his Spirit. His Spirit was sent into this world after he ascended to heaven to convict the world of sin being wrong, Jesus being right, and that judgment is coming. That's why the Spirit, a major reason the Spirit's here in this world. There's also his Word. He's given us his written Word to be able to explaining it very clearly what life is about, how we are not right with God, how he's provided a way for us to be made right, and that's Jesus Christ. These are all ways that God pulls people toward himself, but there's one more on here. His creation, his law, his Spirit, his word, and then his people. We, Christians, saints of God, are a major way that we pull people toward God. Number one is witnessing through our words the message of life, the gospel. But another major way is through witnessing through our work, showing people the gospel. Our words tell people the gospel. Our work in this world shows people the gospel. Now, I don't know what you think of when you hear the word work. The word work. What is the word work? What emotions does that bring up in you? For a lot of people, it's negative. Work, I don't want to work. I want to enjoy my life. I just work because I have to put food on the table. If I could not work, I wouldn't work. I hate my job. I hate the people I work with. I live for the weekend. That's a lot of people's attitude about work today. It's a dirty word that has to be done. Maybe you feel that way. I don't know. But God says that's not the way he feels about the word work. Ephesians 2:10 says, we are his workmanship. That's his work. Created, for what reason? Created in Christ Jesus for good works. A lot of people are looking for the meaning of life today. Why are we here? What are we doing? What is life all about? You don't have to search and wonder what life is all about. God tells us life is about working. He created us to do good works. Our first and greatest commandment is what? To love God. The second commandment is to love others. Loving God and loving others is why we're here, but that's not primarily a feeling of love that we're supposed to give. If there's someone that comes to you and they're starving, telling them how much you love them isn't enough. You need to do actions of love. Acts of love is what genuine love, how genuine love is expressed. And so why were you created? You were created in order to do loving actions through good works. To love others, to love God and others through doing good works for them. That is why you're here. That's the meaning of life. loving others by doing good works for them. We said last week that we are God's appointed change agents in this world in order to be able to be salt and light. Remember, salt stops corruption, light makes things brighter. That's why you're here in this world, to make this world a better place by doing as much good as you can. That's why God has created you. And what happens when you and I do good works? When you give yourself to doing good works in your life, what happens? I ran across a verse this week that talks about slaves. In Titus 2:9, it says, "Teach slaves to be subject to their masters in everything, to try to please them, not to talk back, not to steal from them, but show that they can be trusted." Slavery today is outlawed, of course, in the United States. But back in New Testament days, more than half of the people who were working in Rome were slaves. There were more slaves than employees in Rome. And so you'd have a church, maybe our size, and half of you would be slaves who are owned by a slave owner somewhere else. And so many of the New Testament letters speak to this, how slaves should behave as Christian slaves. Because what do you imagine a slave was like on the job? You don't want to be here. You're forced to be here. You're forced to do this. You're owned by someone else. You probably didn't put out the best work ethic, right? And he says here what they're supposed to do. He says they're supposed to obey their masters, please them, not talk back to them, not steal from them, show them that they can be trusted. That is what the slaves of the New Testament time period needed to hear, the Christian slaves. You need to live differently than the way all the other slaves are living. And this verse goes on to say why they needed to live differently. It goes on to say, do all those things so that, what do you imagine is coming? Be obedient, please your master, don't talk back, don't steal, show that you're trustworthy. So that what? And then it says, so that in every way, they, the slaves, will make the teaching about God, our Savior, attractive. So here is a man, he's a slave to a slave owner. He goes and somehow he hears about Christ and he believes. And he comes back and his master hears that he's become a Christian. And he says, what is a Christian? What is this all about? And he teaches them, he tells them about the teachings of Christ. Now, what if that slave just goes back and he has a completely different life now? And he's obeying from his heart, and he's not stealing, and he's not talking back, and he's showing himself trustworthy. What's that slave's work habit going to do for the teachings of the gospel? It's going to make them attractive, it says here. His work could make the teachings of Christ attractive to his unsaved master, and that he might look into it because of that. But what if that Christian slave has that conversation with his master and then just goes right back to living like all the other slaves are, untrustworthy and talking back and not being really obedient? It talks about that in 1 Timothy 6:1. It says, Christians who are slaves should give their masters full respect, and then it says, so that the name of God and his teaching will not be shamed. That's the opposite of that slave having a good work ethic and making the teachings of Christ attractive. If you don't have a good work ethic and are not, doing a good job in your work, that's going to bring shame to Christ and his teachings. God and his teachings can either be made attractive or shameful based upon how I work and how you work among those who are non-Christians. That's what this is teaching us. God today pulls people to himself all the time through his creation and through his word and through the Spirit and through his law written on our hearts, but also through the work that you and I do as Christians. That's an important responsibility. And the question we want to ask ourselves today is, how well are we working? Students, when your teacher tells you to, be quiet and study for the test, what workers, when your boss tells you, hey, I want you to clean up the work area. Employers, when the state inspector comes in and says, you need to change this, this, and that, how well are you doing that work? God says it really matters on an eternal sense, because if you do that really well, that makes Christ's teachings attractive. And if you don't do those things well, it makes them shameful in the eyes of the people who are watching you work. How you work really matters for the kingdom of God. So in Ephesians 6, God gives 4 requirements for Christian workers. In the passage here, 4 requirements for Christian workers, and you've likely heard most of these, but our purpose here is to have a checklist. Are you living up to these 4 requirements? God says the evangelism of the world takes place partly through people watching you work. So it's really important we get it right. So this morning we're going to look at 4 requirements for Christian workers and how other people are watching you, and you need to show them these qualities in your work. Whether you're a student, whether you're just an active worker in the community, whether you're retired and maybe don't go to a job every day, but people are still watching you as you work in your yard and as you work in the community and do things. Non-Christians are watching us, and we reflect upon the teachings of Christ through the way we do our work. So let's read verses 5 through 8, and again note that they are addressed to slaves, but the principle applies to anyone who is doing work. Verse 5, slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With good will render service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or a free man. So, again, picture yourself sitting in church and you're one of the half of the congregation that is a slave. Your master is giving you the morning off and you get to go to church. And you hear that a letter is going to be read by the Apostle Paul, or from the Apostle Paul, and there's a section in it about slaves, and you're a slave, and you're thinking, he's going to speak to me this morning. What do you imagine he's going to say? You're probably hoping that he'll say something like, well, you know, because you're a slave of Jesus Christ, you don't have to be a slave anymore. Set yourself free from your master. Go out there and live in the world for Jesus Christ. But that's not what Paul says to slaves in this letter or in any of the New Testament letters. He says, obey your masters and be the best workers you can be for them. God, as bad as slavery was, God's intention in New Testament times wasn't to cause it to be broken up. It was caused it to be transformed from the inside by Christian slaves becoming the best workers that their masters have. And over that to change things from the inside out, and as it eventually did. In your inserts, the first area for workers to check is this. Number 1, are you obeying your leaders? Are you obeying your leaders? Pretty simple. Verse 5, obey your masters. Be obedient to your masters. These, who your leader is anyone that you're working for. You might be a child and your parent has told you to get to work. You might be a student and the teachers told you to get to work. It might be, you're an employee and the boss has told you to get to work. It might be you're a business owner and the government has told you to get to work and do something for the government. Everyone who works has a leader of some sort. And God says, I want to make it very clear to you. Obey your leader. Kids, obey your parents when they tell you to clean your room. Are you doing that, kids? Or are you not doing that? It's that simple. Students, and the teacher says to stop talking and get to work. Are you obeying them or not obeying? Employees, your boss tells you to, pick up the workplace, before you go. Are you obeying them or not? It's very simple, but God has made it very, very, this is important because whether or not they will consider the teachings of Christ has a lot to do with whether you would just simply obey. You might say, well, yeah, but my teacher's a real jerk. Or my, boss at work, he's such a selfish guy and he's, all he cares about is himself. Yes, it can be really, really hard to obey your leaders at times. You all know. I would say at least 2 or 3 times a year, someone comes to me and says, you wouldn't believe what my boss is acting like. Bosses and supervisors can be some of the worst leaders out there. What does Jesus say to do anyway? Obey them. Unless they're requiring you to disobey God himself, you need to obey him. If they're unreasonable, you need to obey them. If they're being selfish about something, you need to obey them. If you were in a position of leadership, would you expect the people under you to obey you? Yeah. You wouldn't want them questioning you and being lazy and ignoring and doing half the work. God says you give that type of effort to the people that you are under, the way you would want to be followed if you were in the lead. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are you obeying your leader? God says it needs to be a 10. If it's a 5, if it's a 7, if it's a 9, change it. Make sure that if I came to your boss and said, I'm going to check today, how well is so-and-so doing and obeying you? Make sure that they would tell me, hey, she's doing a 10. He's a 10. Okay, that's what God wants. That's the first check. The second area to check in verse 5 says, obey your leaders, and then it says, with fear and trembling. Look at that. With fear and trembling. You're supposed to be scared to death? No, that's not what that means. It means with respect. That was the New Testament way of saying, obey with respect. And so that's in your insert. Are you giving respect to your leaders? Are you giving respect to your leaders? So God says we must obey them, but not just obey them in a certain way. Obey them with respect. With respect. Maybe you have had or have a supervisor or a boss who is really worthy of respect. I mean, just personally, you think they're a great person. More than likely, that's not true. More than likely, you can say, well, they're sometimes a good person, but man, they can make some terrible decisions or some really selfish decisions. And there are some in leadership who are just outright lousy people. They are disobedient people to God. They are very difficult people to work with. And you might have one of those over you right now. God says, I want you to give them respect anyway. Not respect for their personal life, but respect for their position that they hold over you. You have to view them as up here, even though personally they may really be messed up in their personal life. They have a position of authority over you that you need to give respect with. So treat them with respect. Don't just obey, but obey with respect. So you think your mom is wrong to make you stay home from going out to be with your friends to be able to clean up the house? Okay. But you need to obey her, and you need to obey her with respect, not a snarky attitude, but with a respectful attitude. You think your teacher is wrong for making you to, stop talking with your friends and study for this test, that material you already know anyway, and I don't care about the material on top of that. Okay, yes, that all may be true, but you need to obey your teacher and respect her. Show her a good attitude, not a disrespectful attitude. And the same goes at work. If your boss is repeatedly making selfish choices that benefit him at the expense of you, it's not wrong to speak up, but speak with respect. And if they're not going to change, then you have to obey them with respect. Those are hard things to do and really tests your faith. Will you love God with all your heart and obey what he says? Or will you give in to the way the world works and just complain and gripe and fight and be difficult? But we got to do the right thing because non-Christians are watching how we work. And your actions will either pull them toward Christ or can push them away from Christ. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much respect are you giving your leaders, the people who are over you? Are you giving them 10? If not, you need to change that. All right, a third area to check. Verse 5 says, obey in the sincerity of your heart. Obey in the sincerity of your heart. Verse 6 says, serve from the heart. What does it mean to obey from your heart? It's the sincerity of your heart. God is saying it's not enough to obey your leaders on the outside. The heart is on the inside. You need to obey and respect your leaders from the inside. Verse 6 says, not by way of eye service. Okay. So there's the outside that the eye sees, and there's the inside where you really live. God says, I want you to obey from the heart. The third point in your insert, are you giving wholehearted effort? Wholehearted effort to your work. We all know what it is to fake work, right? Your boss or your teacher is standing over your shoulder and, man, you're busy, you're working away, and da-da-da-da-da, and then they walk out of the room and, now you relax, you rest, you maybe still be working, you're not completely not working, but you're not working at the same pace. Maybe you are completely not working and now you're on your phone doing something you want, but then you hear them come back and whoa, and you're right back at work, hard working. That's called fake work, fake working hard, and God has a name for it. Sin is the name for that. That's sin. God says you are not allowed to do eye service so that when their eyes are on you, you're as good as gold. God says, I want you to do it from your heart so that whether they're out of the room or in the room, you're doing the same effort. It doesn't matter if you're being watched or not. That's a real test of character, right? That separates the immature from the mature. If you're mature, you keep working when that boss, when that teacher, when that parent walks out of the room. That's a sign of maturity. Immaturity is you lower your effort. And that needs to change. Okay, but why does it matter if I do it with my whole heart or not? My boss, doesn't see my heart. Well, that's not true. Because verse 5 says, work as unto Christ. Verse 6 says, as servants of Christ. Verse 7 says, do it as to the Lord, not to men. Who is your boss that you're working for? 3 times here it says, it's Jesus. If you've got a job, your boss is Jesus. If you're a student, you're the one you're answerable to, the ultimate teacher is Jesus. If you're a child in the home, it's not your parent that you're doing your work for. It's Jesus standing behind your parent. And that's why the heart matters, because he sees the heart. Your boss or your parent or your teacher may leave the room. Jesus never leaves the room, and you're working for him. And that's why it's so stupid and immature to be able to say, oh, I just lowered my level and they don't know. He knows, and you're going to answer to him one day about it. The fourth area to check in the insert, are you serving Jesus himself? Are you serving Jesus himself? So, as you obey your mom to clean up your room or clean up the house, you need to see Jesus standing behind your mom, and you're doing it for him. As you're cleaning up the workshop for your boss, who left early and left you to do this, you're serving Jesus standing behind your boss. He is the one that you're serving. That's why you need to do everything you do with your heart. If you follow the lead of your coworkers or the other students that are around you, you're not going to work hard. You're going to give half-hearted effort. You're going to try to get away with as much as possible. You're going to try to avoid as much work as you can. That's the way the world works. But Jesus says, look, I want you to serve me, giving me all of your heart, all of the time. And a result of that will be others will see that and they'll say, wow, there's something about those Christian teachings that I want to look into. But if we talk instead of working, if we goof off, Instead of being, giving it all of our heart, we give half our heart. And other people see that, we say, well, there's nothing that special about Christianity. If that's Christianity, I don't want it. Think of your last day at work. And think about taking the work you did that day, and it may have been work around the house, it may have been work in your yard, it may have been work, at your job, at school. Imagine taking that work and presenting it at the throne of Jesus, and right there for him as a gift. What type of quality gift would he say that is? Because that's just not an imaginary scenario. That happens every day you work. You're giving him this work as a gift. Would he say that's a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10? If you aren't confident that you're giving Jesus a 10, you need to change that. He is worthy of a 10 every single day. He's kept you out of hell for eternity. The least you can do every single day is give him a 10's worth of work. Something that's worthy of him. Verse 8 tells us that doing good work really matters because we will receive back the same quality that we put into it. Look at verse 8 again. Knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether you're a slave or whether you're a free person. So have you ever done a great job at work? You really have. And absolutely no one said anything about it. Maybe you poured out your heart and soul into a school paper and you got a D. Or maybe you did something here at church and no one seemed to notice. That can be, unfortunately, a very common thing that happens. And it can be very discouraging. It can make you want to give up doing anything. And imagine being a slave. No slave ever got a pay raise for doing a good job. You could do the very best and completely be ignored because you're a slave and that's what you're supposed to do. You don't get any honors, you don't get any thanks. But Jesus wanted these slaves here in Ephesus to know, look, if you do a really, really good job, it doesn't matter if anyone else notices. Jesus, the one you're really doing it for, notices, and I'm going to reward all of your good that you've done. It's all coming back to you. It's all coming back to you. And that goes for every one of us. All of us, if we're giving obedience with respect, wholehearted, serving Jesus, all that good is going to come back on us. You might think, well, I'm just wasting my time here. You are not. You're investing your time if you're doing obedient work with respect, wholehearted for Jesus. And students, let that encourage you. Because you may not be the brightest person in the class and your hardest effort may not see much reward for it, except by Jesus. And he will gladly and generously reward you for all the good that you're putting into the work. And if you're an employee and you have to stay late, do work that you really shouldn't have to, but you're going to obey your boss because he told you to do it, that's coming back for you. That's coming back. And especially if your boss doesn't notice the next day and you feel bad, maybe gives credit to somebody else and you don't get it, like that good is coming back on you. It's not a waste of time because you're not serving people, you're serving Jesus. So let that encourage you that all the good you're doing is going to come back on you. But also let it make you gulp. Because not just the good is going to come back on you, the bad's going to come back on you. It says that, 2 Corinthians 5:10. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Why? So that each one may be recompensed, receive back for his deeds in the body, according to what he has done, whether good or bad. So God says, if you're going to put a bunch of good into your work, that's coming back to you. If you're going to give poor work, that's going to come back on you too. It says in Colossians 3:25, he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done. This is the old sowing and reaping thing. You plant bad seed, you're going to get a bad harvest. If you do poor work, you're going to get something poor in return. It's just a cause and effect type thing. That means we should care about how we do our house chores, how we do our yard work, how we do our schoolwork, how we do our work, because we are determining what's going to come back to us. Just in a very selfish way, you ought to be concerned about that. You're determining what's going to come into your life by how you work every day. Good work will receive reward. Poor work will receive penalty. Now, penalty, what does that mean? Does that mean punishment? God's going to punish me for this? You might receive punishment from your parents or from your boss or from the teacher, yes. Is this penalty discipline from God? We know that God disciplines his people in the New Testament with sickness when they do the wrong thing. We know that he punishes them with troubles in their lives when they do the wrong thing. We know that he punishes us with not answering our prayers when we do the wrong things. All those things might come back on you if you are giving poor work performance. God trying to get your attention, I'm not pleased with this. And so I will allow things to go bad in your life in order to get your attention. And so you say, whoa, I got to stop giving poor work performance and I got to give good work performance. And then I can start piling blessings on you. Could God be disciplining you today? If things are going wrong in your life, could God be disciplining you today to get you to stop putting in poor work as he's trying to get your attention? If so, if you see where you're lacking in your work, change it. God says that good that you change it to will come back on you. A fourth area to check is, are you serving Jesus himself? It really matters. I know work can be some of the hardest stuff we do because you got to go whether you want to or not. You got to work with people that, whether you like them or not. You have to do responsibilities whether you are interested in them or not. It can be very, very discouraging if you've got a job that is just constantly on a negative thing like that. Imagine if Jesus came in our doors and walked down the aisle and he came into your pew and he sat next to you. And imagine he looked you in the eye and he said to you, look, I'd like you to give me your best at work tomorrow, at school tomorrow. And I know you're really not interested in a lot that's going on there, but I'd like you to give me your very best, to work hard, to do it with all your heart, to be respectful to your leaders, and to do it for me. Would that make a difference? Could you say, yeah, I'll do that for you? That's exactly what Christ is asking you to do. To do good work with all your heart, respectful of those in your leadership, remembering that it's done for him. That's what he's asking you to do. And he's done so much for you, everything, to save your life. Could you give him these things? That's what he's asking you this morning through this sermon. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your work? Whether it's school, work, home, how would you rate it? Jesus wants you doing it for him. So here are God's 4 expectations for Christian workers. And as we said, it matters because your work is a tool of evangelism. There are many tools in this world for God pulling others to him. Your work is one of them. Non-Christians are watching. Your teachers are watching. Your principal is watching if you're at school. Your boss is watching. Your supervisor, the owner of the business is watching. Your neighbors are watching. As you're working on your house, as you're working on your car, as you're doing your yard. People are watching how we work. God says it is either pulling them toward the teachings of God, or you can push them away from the teachings of God based on how you work. These are eternal things. So it's crucial that we check our work. So let's run through it again. Are you obeying your leaders? Or is there disobedience going on? Which of those is true of you? Are you giving respect to your leaders or disrespecting them? Remember, they themselves may be not in a good place, but it's their position over you that you need to show respect to. Number 3, are you giving wholehearted effort or half-hearted effort? And number 4, are you serving Jesus or just people? Change what needs to be changed. Get it out of your life. and keep what's going right and make it strong. All right? It really, really matters how you work. I want to close with a quote that I found by C.S. Lewis that talks about the fact that there are no ordinary people. There are no ordinary people. This is what he said. This is from his book, The Weight of Glory. It is a serious thing to remember that the dullest, most uninteresting person you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long, we are, in some degree, helping each other to one or to the other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations and cultures, arts and civilizations, these are mortal. But it is immortals with whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Yet God says the non-Christians around you will live in eternity somewhere. And your work that you are displaying before them is one of the things that will help determine what they end up going to. Do your work well, and you will make the teachings of Christ attractive so that people can move toward the kingdom of God. It's a great responsibility we have. Make sure you're living up to that responsibility every day. You never met an ordinary person. They are all watching you work. So make sure you work to the glory of God.